So thank you all for joining us today. I would like to give you a warm welcome to our third webinar, but actually only the second one this year. Today's webinar will be about the Swedish market for natural ingredients for cosmetics. I will start by introducing our team, what Open Trade Gate Sweden are up to today, and then give the screen to Jolanda, that will be joining me today to talk about the trends and opportunities for natural ingredients for cosmetics in the Swedish market. But please feel free to ask all the questions you like during the webinar in the Q&A chat box that you can see below on the screen. And we will answer all your questions after the presentation. So before saying more about what we do and our new initiatives, I want to show you the team that works at OTGS, as we have grown quite a lot since last year. We're currently a team of 6 people. Anna Maria and Emma have been working with OTGS activities at the National Board of Trade for a few years, while Linda, Sara, and myself joined last year. And we also have a new colleague. His name is Teddy, and started a couple of weeks ago. We have quite varied backgrounds. Some of us have worked mostly with trade promotion and export strategy, while some have worked with trade policy and trade regulations for many years. I will explain briefly the main mission for our activities and our overall goal, which is to facilitate trade from developing economies to Sweden and the EU. We are funded by the Swedish Development Aid, which is channeled to us from the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. All of our services are free of charge for the exporters and trade promotion organizations that we support in developing countries. We have 2 main types of activities. We work as a point of contact with capacity building, but I will explain what this is about in the upcoming slides. The first part about being a point of contact for exporters and export promotion organizations. We collect, analyze, and share information with exporters abroad and importers in Sweden. This is to avoid exporters having to reach out to several government agencies and experts to get ready for export. Our goal is to facilitate them and take those contacts for them. So the aim of our point of contact is to be a one-stop shop for exporters from developing countries. We provide information on legal requirements and private standards, but also on market trends and other relevant information that exporters may need when considering to enter the Swedish market. Our website is our most important channel for updated information on export matters. We have launched a new version of the website, so I would like to invite you all to navigate to it, please. We have market reports and other important information there. We will provide you after the presentation all the contact information for this service. We also have the possibility to work with capacity building in longer term projects. This slide shows you what OTGS can do in the process, where a company wants to reach the Swedish market, or perhaps a BSO that wants to support exporters in the process of reaching the Swedish market. Today, we mainly work this way in our long-term engagement. The steps will look different depending on the need of the exporter or the BSO we're supporting, and we're always trying to adapt the project as much as possible. Some of these steps are more complex, for example, finding a buyer or a matchmaking, and they're usually done at a later stage of our projects where we can see that the exporters in the project are more export ready and their product offering can be a match for the Swedish market demand. We can also work with a business support organization in the partner country with capacity building in working methods. The BSO will then have the role to support its companies that want to export to Sweden and the EU. But all of our projects are very different in design and focus, and we have different target groups. And right now we are actually working in Bolivia with the superfoods. We're in South Africa with agriculture products, but also with natural ingredients. And we are also evaluating a number of project proposals to start up new long-term projects in the near future. I would like to highlight a quite new guide we have that we are really proud of. It's called the Road to Export, which is a new tool that we have recently launched. It's a step-by-step approach to an informed way to start exporting. The Road to Export is divided in these 5 models and finishes with a checklist where the exporters can take what information, skills, and material they have and what they still have to work on to be ready. This can be used directly by exporters, and it can also be a good tool for export promotion professionals to assist exporters in their export journey from a complete beginner to a more pro. That's the idea behind this tool, actually. And the different steps and links to relevant data can be found on our website. But the idea is also to work with interactive trainings in this approach to export. We're working today with some pilot projects within the Road to Export. So I would like you all to invite you to check this new tool and get back to us with any questions or doubts you might have when you go through it. Before we talk about Sweden, more specific, I will talk briefly about the European Union, very short. It currently has 27 member states, which can be seen as one market with almost 500 million consumers, and it's considered one of the biggest markets in the world. In terms of trade, the EU is known as a customs union. This means in practice that there are no custom duties for trade between the EU member states. All EU member states apply the same custom duties for imports from third countries into the EU. And it also means that we have common regulations related to import and export. In other words, the EU countries have a common trade policy. And once a product is imported in one of the EU member states, it will be possible to export or send it further to another EU member. This means that the product is in free circulation. But you should have in mind that individual member states can still have regulations that are specific to them. They may require labeling in the local language, for example. So now, welcome to Sweden. And Sweden is a member of the European Union since 1995. We don't have the euro as a currency. The local currency is the Swedish crown. And Sweden is a fairly big country geographically, but with a rather small population. We are a little bit more than 10 million people. And most Swedes live in the south of the country where the climate is milder and there's better connectivity to the mainland Europe. The 2 biggest cities after Stockholm are Gothenburg and Malmö. They're both in the south, and 86% of the Swedes live in cities. And Sweden, as well as the other Nordic countries, have high taxes as a share of GDP. The high income and corporate taxes pay for a large public sector, including healthcare and free education, among other things. But what is very interesting when it comes to trade is that 40% of the Swedish GDP comes from exports. So much of the economic activity is based on exporting. Even more interesting for you is probably that 80% of the imports come from other EU countries. So this is why imports are really important for us, and also why Sweden is very open to trade. And just small facts that 21% of the income of the Swedes is spent in food and drinks. And it's about a fifth of the incomes here on average. And that Sweden imports twice as much in food and drinks than we export actually. So that was a little bit about Sweden before we get to the really interesting part that you most probably want to hear. And it's Jolanda that will join us and talk about the market trends and opportunities for natural ingredients.
Perfect, thank you. There we go. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon in case you're in different time zone. And thank you all for joining. Today, as Constanza just mentioned, I will be doing a short presentation on the Nordic market for natural ingredients for cosmetics. These are the outcomes of a study that we did for OTGS, which will be published next week. So do keep an eye out on the website because there's lots of information in this study. What I'm presenting today really is the main outcomes of it. But you can find more details, links, sources, etc. in the study as well. We called it the Nordic market, but I should say that most of the information in today's presentation will be about Sweden, because Sweden is one of the largest natural cosmetics markets in the Nordic region. So, for example, comparing to Norway or Finland, these are much smaller markets for natural ingredients for cosmetics. So that's why we focus on Sweden mostly. And again, if you have any questions, use the chat function or the question function, and we'll get to those after this presentation. A little bit about the company that I work for, Profound. We're based in the Netherlands. Our goal, our mission is to generate local income and sustainable sourcing by linking producers of natural ingredients and agricultural products to the market. We have three main services. One is market analysis, which is also where we did the study for. In terms of compliance, we work directly with companies, but also support organizations to get them ready to the international market, with what kind of requirements they need to comply with, or certifications, etc. And in terms of market entry, this is where we really the last step. So really introducing exporters to the markets, either with matchmaking or study tours, or with pavilions at trade fairs. So, for example, at BioFach in July this year, we will be hosting an Organic Africa pavilion, where exporters from different African countries are introducing or presenting their products to the visitors of BioFach, of this trade fair. About myself, as I mentioned, my name is Jolanda. I've been working at Profound for a little over 9 years now, doing a lot in terms of market research and trade promotion or market entry. And in terms of products, I really focus on various natural ingredients. One of them is natural ingredients for cosmetics, but also working on food ingredients and ingredients for health products, such as food supplements and herbal medicine. But today our focus is on cosmetic ingredients. So a little overview of what we'll be discussing. We'll look at the market and developments in the markets, but also the natural cosmetics side of things in Sweden. And we have some data on actual imports of natural ingredients. And here we focus mostly on essential oils, vegetable oils, and botanical extracts as key ingredients used in cosmetics, key natural products. Then we'll have a look at trends. I will briefly mention or discuss requirements, but mostly I have some sites with more information. As Constanza mentioned, Sweden is part of the EU, so legal requirements are the same as in the EU. And then we'll look at distribution channels, some tips on where to find buyers, and then I have a short conclusion. And then after that, we have some time for questions. In terms of the Swedish market, so the European market for cosmetics in 2020, which are the most recent figures, amounted to almost 77 billion euros in terms of retail sales. And Sweden is the 8th market in that sense, so just behind the Netherlands, with sales of 2 billion euros in 2020, which is just over 21 billion Swedish crowns. And as you can see, Germany, France, UK, Italy, these are the largest countries in the EU and also have the largest cosmetic markets in the EU. Now, if we compare Sweden, especially to the year before, so 2019, we can see that the total Swedish market decreased, as many markets actually did in Europe, because this was the first year of the pandemic, which definitely impacted the cosmetic market. What is interesting is that the Swedish market decreased by 4%, while the European average was almost 5%. And figures really varied a lot. I think the lowest I saw was in Germany, where the market was almost stable. And in Italy, the cosmetic market decreased by almost 10%. So there really is a lot of variation in that. But in Sweden, it was minus 4%. And there is some modest growth expected again for the coming years, a little over 2% annually until 2023. So we are expecting that the market will bounce back after COVID. If we look at different segments, so in cosmetics, we usually look at 5 different segments: fragrances, decorative cosmetics, which is really things like makeup and concealer, these kinds of products. Skincare, anything that's you put on your skin, so creams, lotions, moisturizers. Hair care, so including shampoos and conditioners, and toiletries, which includes things like body wash or shower gels, etc. And if you see here in the first year of the pandemic, this is what happened in Sweden is very similar to what happened in other countries, that decorative cosmetics took a big hit. Because with lockdowns and not being able to travel to work and working from home and all these things, consumers overall spend a lot less money on makeup and these kinds of products. What is interesting is that toiletries increased and skincare did not decrease as much as in the rest of Europe. And these two market segments also benefited slightly, or in the case of toiletries, a lot from the COVID pandemic, because of course things like hand sanitizers, hand care, so the hand creams, etc., were used a lot more in this first year of the pandemic. So we actually see a growth in those kinds of products. And just to compare overall, so the skincare and toiletries market segments together make up a little over half the market in Sweden in total. And these are also interesting, especially skincare is a very interesting market segment for natural ingredients, but also toiletries does have quite some usage for natural ingredients as well. Then if we look at brands on the market, I have here an overview of the largest, the 10 largest brands on the Swedish market. As you can see, together these brands make up about 46% of the total market in Sweden. And it's a mix of a few Swedish brands, several French and US brands, and even one from Japan. And what is really interesting is that in terms of brands and in terms of the types of companies that you'll find in Sweden, is that industry sources actually indicate it's a very welcoming market to small brands. So as you can see, 10 of these make up already half the market, but there are also a lot of small brands or more focused brands available on the market. So it's a really good mix of these larger and smaller brands. In terms of natural ingredients, because that's the focus of our talk today, we also wanted to look at natural cosmetics. Of course, natural ingredients for cosmetics can be used in all types of cosmetic products, but natural cosmetics do tend to have a higher share of natural ingredients. So in terms of natural cosmetics, we talk about products that are using natural, derived natural, or natural nature identical ingredients, and often these have a percentage on the final product that shows exactly what kind of share of natural ingredients is there. In Europe, overall, this is about 4% of the total market, which comes down to about 4 billion. And a little over half of these are certified natural cosmetic products. In Sweden, unfortunately, we don't have exact figures on the size of natural cosmetics, but we do expect this to be a larger share than compared to Europe, so more than 4%. For example, in Sweden, Sweden has the highest share of consumers in Europe in general that indicate that eco-labels play an important role in purchasing decisions at about 70%. Interesting, Denmark, the second is the second largest group. So in Denmark, about 55% of consumers say that eco-labels are important part in their purchasing decision. Interesting sources, so people that I talked to from Swedish brands also say that the average Swedish consumer is very aware of natural and eco-friendly products. So this is actually an interesting market for natural cosmetics, and as I mentioned before, compared to these markets in Norway and Finland, really the largest one in Scandinavia, and even probably a larger share than the European average. There was research done in 2018 by the Natural Organic Cosmetics Sweden Association. This is a non-profit association that aims to drive the natural organics cosmetics market in Sweden. It was founded in 2014, and they now have 90 members, which I also list on their website. So it's a good source to see what kind of brands are working in natural organic cosmetics in Sweden. And research they did in 2018 indicated that the markets grew 22% compared to the year before. That a little over half of the markets was made up by local brands, but certified brands was, compared to the European average, actually a bit lower. But all indicating that this was a very promising market in Sweden, the natural and organic cosmetics. I also wanted to include a few examples of products, so more final products that you can find on the market in Sweden. And I've picked two. One is actually, the first one, Esse, is a South African brand that is now selling their products in Sweden. And what's really interesting is, I mean, of course, they use a large share of South African ingredients. And when I talked to a brand in Sweden, they actually mentioned that because of the growing popularity of this South African brand, the consumers are more aware of South African ingredients as well. Another example that I have is True Organic of Sweden. So this is a Swedish brand, very strongly focusing on organic. They indicate that they have a higher share of organic ingredients than most brands on the market in Sweden. And they produce everything in Sweden, but source, I'm sure, also from outside of Sweden through traders. The examples that they have in this product are things like rosehip oil, and they often use essential oils from bergamot and geranium to scent their products. Other products that they use are things like shea butter, beeswax, aloe vera, chia seed oil. So definitely also some products that are not grown or produced in Sweden, which I find quite interesting as well. And these are just some of the many products that you can find on the Swedish markets. But I wanted to give a few examples of what this looks like. We also had a look at imports. I think imports figures tell us a lot about the markets and what it's like. And as I mentioned, we looked at essential oils, vegetable oils, and botanical extracts as indicators of ingredients used in cosmetics. And for all of these, we looked mostly at the niche products. And the reason we do that is not so much because, for example, essential oils, we did not look at citrus oils and mint oils, which are also used in cosmetics, but generally a large share is used in food products. So we tend to focus more on the niche products from which we have the assumption that a larger share will be used in cosmetic products. If we look at essential oils, I think in general what happened in Europe during COVID is that imports of essential oils for using in perfumes decreased, simply because the use of perfumes decreased during COVID. But there was an increase of essential oils for use in things like aromatherapy or with oils that have a perceived immune boosting properties or antiviral properties, as these were seen as healthier and helpful to combat or to prevent COVID. So for example, if we look here at this overview, this is an overview of imports by Sweden of essential oils from 2016 to 2020. And you can see here that the value of these imports increased substantially in those years. Especially there was a big jump from 2019 until 2020. If we look at the shares or what kind of suppliers, it's a big mix actually. It's a mix of several European suppliers that includes traders, probably from Germany, but also quite some producers like in France or Serbia. And what's interesting about European producers of essential oils that this is a mix of different countries. So for example, in Eastern Europe, there's lots of essential oil production from wild collection. And France, for example, is a producer of essential oils, but also an important trade hub, as Germany is as well. In terms of suppliers outside of the EU, so these are a bit smaller. The biggest ones are China and South Africa, both 4% of imports. China especially offers a very large range of essential oils. So we try to see what kind of products would these cover, but it's a really large range, even essential oils that are produced in other countries. And then South Africa, Turkey, and Egypt are generally smaller suppliers, but of high value essential oils with a strong Mediterranean focus, like rose geranium from South Africa or thyme oil from Turkey. If we look at vegetable oils, so here again, we looked at the niche segments, so smaller oils. We do see growing imports. I think it's very clear to see that from 2016 to 2019, 2020, there was strong growth of vegetable oil imports by Sweden. And what's an interesting trend here is that vegetable oils are also used more and more to replace mineral oils or palm oils, especially in cosmetics. What is also important to note here is that almost 100%, so 97% of 2020 imports, Swedish imports of vegetable oils came from Denmark. One of the things that could explain that is that in Denmark, AAK has its production facilities, which is a Sweden-based global producer of vegetable oils and fats. So what we expect is that actually in Denmark, these vegetable oils are refined or processed and are then traded to Sweden from there. So for the niche vegetable oils, we see very few direct imports from producer countries. And in terms of botanical extracts, the story is a bit more like the essential oils, in that it comes from various different sources. There is a strong increase in terms of the value of imports, although the volume is quite stable over the last 2 years. The main supplier in 2020 was Chile, which actually increased supply substantially from 2019 to 2020 in terms of value. And what we found is that this was due to one main product, Quillaya extract, which has lots of different applications, but one of them was to use an adjuvant for a vaccine against COVID by a Swedish company. So we expect that most of the increase came from that use. Other countries outside of Europe include India, China, and South Africa. Of these, India and China produce a very wide range of botanical extracts because they have substantial extraction industries and also act as processors for products from countries around them. And in terms of South Africa, we found mostly things like vanilla extracts for food use, but also some smaller extracts. that were being exported to Sweden. Of course, we also had a look at trends. And as I mentioned before, sustainable sourcing is very important, has been important in the cosmetic industry in Europe for a while. But in Sweden, particularly important due to, because Swedish consumers are quite concerned about environmental and social impacts of their cosmetic purchases. So it really has increased attention to sustainable sourcing. What's also interesting is that on a European, more policy level, things are changing with the European Green Deal, which is really developing legislation and policies for sustainable sourcing. The Green Deal aims to combat climate change, environmental degradation, and we expect that the requirements will become higher for natural ingredients trade. So because importers will now have to report on sustainability efforts, including sourcing. So we expect that importers will place more requirements on their suppliers, for example, or first and foremost in transparent supply chains and traceable sourcing, so that they have enough information to deal with these increased requirements at a policy level. In terms of code, of course, we already saw that this impacted the Swedish market for cosmetics. We also saw that there is a growing demand, not just in cosmetics, but also in other segments for immune boosting and mental health products. But what's also important to note here is that COVID also, of course, led to several logistical issues. So there were quite some disruptions in supplies, either from illnesses of workers or lockdowns or different restrictions, that importers really struggled to secure supplies for their products. At the same time, we've seen reduced capacity at major ports, meaning that there was a reduction of transports of some products to Europe. And especially this was mentioned by several people that I talked to as well, there was an increase in transport costs for those products that they were importing. So we do see, and we've heard from importers that they were mostly focusing on securing their supplies from existing suppliers and not so much on developing new trade relationships. At the same time, now that things are opening up here in Europe again, we do expect that this will change and get back to the way it was before COVID. And then one thing that I also wanted to mention is on the Scandinavian beauty routine that is increasingly popular, not just in Sweden, but I think especially outside of Sweden, called LAGOM, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but I'm not Swedish, so that's okay. Basically, this means not too much or not too little, so just right. Mintel actually predicted a few years ago already that this beauty routine will grow popularity, especially also outside of Scandinavia, so really spreading the awareness of this routine. And these products really focus on minimizing both beauty routines, but also formulations. So formulations will be based more on few ingredients, strong focus on natural products that are ethically produced, and of course using natural ingredients. So there is an interesting opportunity here also for natural ingredients from outside of Europe, but do be aware that products in LAGOM now are strongly focused on ingredients from Northern Europe. So there tends to be a focus on products that are grown in Scandinavia or that are known here already. Then I wanted to have a quick look at some bio requirements. As I mentioned, legal requirements in Sweden are the same as in the rest of Europe, as Sweden is part of the EU. So that means for exporters that you will, or for importers, I should say, legislation specifies that for every cosmetic product, there is a safety report and product information file. And this leads to requirements from buyers to exporters about what kind of information should be provided by them. But if you are already exporting to other countries in the EU, this should not be too different from in terms of what companies expect from you. So that's the benefit of having this harmonized market, that if you can export to one country in the EU, chances are you can do for others as well. In terms of ingredients, what's important to know, there are 4 things that we always mention for ingredients that exporters should be aware of. One is to think on, or to be aware of the rules that exist to use plant resources. And here there are 2 conventions to note. One is CITES, which aims to protect endangered plants and plant products by regulating their trades. So if ingredients are listed on CITES, you probably have to have either trade is restricted or prohibited. So you need to do some additional requirements there. Access and benefit sharing from the Nagoya Protocol provides guidelines to access and use genetic resources as well as traditional knowledge. And this is a rule in the EU that companies working with products, with natural products, need to prove that they meet local laws on access and benefit sharing if these exist. So for exporters, we always advise, be aware of what the rules are in your country, so that you can also explain to your buyer what is expected. REACH, the registration, evaluation, and authorization of chemicals, is a legislation that manages the risk of chemicals, and most cosmetic ingredients are seen as chemicals. This one is especially important for essential oils and some extracts. Where you have to apply with additional rules, and some of these will have to be registered as well. All to ensure that the people that are handling these ingredients can do so safely. Then there are lots of documentation requirements. These often come also from legislation, with things like technical data sheets that buyers expect you to have, certificates of analysis that show the composition of your ingredient, as well as safety data sheets that show that you can, has information about the ingredients, so that again people can handle them safely. And then there is separate legislation on classification, labeling, and packaging of the ingredients, where you also find information on what should be included in these safety data sheets. Now, without going into too much detail here, one thing I think would be useful next week to have a look at the study on the OTGS website, which has a lot more information about the different legislation and how to comply with them. Another source that you can use is CBI, which is part of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which also has information on requirements and on a European level. So mandatory and niche requirements as well. So I do encourage you to have a look at these sources to have more information about what is expected from you if you export to Sweden. Another source that is quite useful is the Access to Markets website from the European Commission, where you can actually search for a specific product name or trade codes, looking at a country that you're in and the country you want to export to. And then this website gives a whole overview of requirements, but also things on taxes, some trade statistics, really gives you more information about your particular product and the market you are exporting to. It's also a really interesting source to look at. And in terms of additional requirements, I read somewhere that 83% of Swedish consumers feel responsible for choosing environmentally friendly products. So it can be really interesting to certify some of your ingredients. We always say that if you do not have certified ingredients yet, always verify with potential buyers and your target market to see if certification is required or demanded. And in terms of the type of standards in Sweden that are relevant, especially looking at natural and organic cosmetics that we saw before was growing quite a bit. Companies in Sweden told me that the main ones are Cosmos or Ecocert, followed by NaTrue. NaTrue for them is a little bit less interesting because the requirements are really much higher in terms of what kind of percentage of natural organic ingredients you have to use in final products. So most tend to prefer Cosmos or Ecocert. But there are lots of different organic standards that you could also follow. The Natural Organic Cosmetics Sweden Association that I mentioned earlier actually have an overview of which standards they consider sufficient to show natural and organic cosmetic ingredients. For fair production, there are also standards on showing social sustainability of your production and processing, such as fair trade, fair for life, and fair wild. This last one is mostly for wild collected ingredients as well. Then what I wanted to have a quick look at distribution channels. One thing that I want to note, because what's important is to determine which buyer is most relevant for an exporter. Really depends on the product that they offer. And what's also important to note is that especially for smaller Scandinavian brands, of which there tend to be quite a few, as we saw earlier in Sweden, they do tend to trade mostly through other European traders, especially from Germany. So, and once brands have reached sufficient sales volume, they can choose to source ingredients directly from exporters, because it does allow for better control of the source and of the quality. But it might be that in order to reach the Swedish market, you would first trade through traders in other countries in Europe. Having said that, if we look at the different type, I have 3 different type of products that I wanted to highlight on what kind of route these can take to access the Swedish markets. So first, unrefined natural ingredients. So for example, cold pressed vegetable oils that still have quite some impurities. These tend to be most interesting for refiners that can reduce these impurities before they are then traded to different users like cosmetic manufacturers. And as we saw earlier, for vegetable oils, especially the niche vegetable oils imported into Sweden, these often go through Denmark for this process. Highly standardized natural ingredients that can be used in a wide range of products and where price is an important purchasing criterion. These often go more through intermediaries like traders or distributors that specialize in sourcing. So these can offer a very wide range of ingredients to cosmetic manufacturers. Often cosmetic manufacturers in Sweden, but also in the rest of Europe, do not source ingredients directly, but prefer to go through traders, with the exception of some key ingredients or strategic ingredients for them, where they do want to have more direct sourcing. Then branded natural ingredients. So these are ingredients with unique properties, also often go through distributors. But these can also go more directly to formulators or brand manufacturers. Formulators, they specialize more in research and development for cosmetic products, where brand manufacturers really have their cosmetic brands. Many formulators, many of these kinds of companies, the formulators, manufacturers, do source through traders. But as I mentioned, for some key ingredients or branded ingredients that are very special or important to their production, they may do source more directly from exporters. So after looking at the channels of how to reach the market, I also wanted to include a few sources where you can find more information to find buyers. Because what I did here when talking to Swedish, doing some interviews with Swedish brands and traders, they do mention that exporters of natural ingredients for cosmetics should actually find and contact Swedish brands directly to pitch their company, pitch their products. So one of the best ways, I think, to find potential buyers is through this first source, the Swedish Cosmetics, Toiletries and Detergents Association. Their website is mostly in Swedish, but with Google Translate, it's very easy to get some information here, because they do list all their members, and per member they also specify what kind of company they are. So if they're a brand, if they're a distributor. So it's really easy for, if you want to figure out what kind of company you're looking for, to find the right ones here. Another interesting one is the Natural Organic Cosmetic Sweden Association, which has an overview of their members, but keep in mind these are mostly brands, mostly cosmetic brands. Trade fairs can also be interesting events to find and meet with buyers. In Sweden, I have two examples. So one is the EcoLife Scandinavia, which takes place in November, again this year in Malmö. Which is together with the Nordic Organic Food Fair, is I think the main event in Sweden for cosmetic products and ingredients. Another one is the Stockholm Beauty Week, but this is mostly targeting brands that are exhibiting there, so less for ingredients. And then of course there are some international trade fairs that companies will attend, or where you can find these kinds of distributors that are then selling their products to Sweden, like in cosmetics or PFNS. And what's also interesting is that ITC Trademap, for example, is an online database where you can get a free account, which also lists importers on the Swedish market. So on this next slide here, I have two lists of companies that have actually imported essential oils and skincare oils into Sweden. What's interesting here is that there is a good overview, or different types of companies are importing these products. So quite some distributors, but there is also some fragrance manufacturers or formulators that are actually already importing these kinds of products. And you can see that it's a mix of international companies and some Swedish-based companies as well. So it's an interesting database or source to be able to find some companies that are actually already importing these kinds of products into Sweden. Then I have one final slide on more buyer preferences on the Swedish market that I think are also relevant for other markets in Europe as well. Really, it's important, as I'm sure everyone already knows, to behave professional, to really maintain your company image in Sweden and also the rest of Europe, to really show to potential buyers that you're a reliable business partner. So these are some more general things that are important in Sweden, things like punctuality, so being on time. Transparency, Sweden is a very open and equal society, so they do expect, buyers expect their suppliers to be transparent, to be honest, not to make false claims, and really to stick to agreements that are made. So that even if there is a problem, you involve your buyer and you come up with solutions already, but really inform them and keep on communicating with them and be honest in that. And what's also important to familiarize yourself with more technical language that is used in this industry, which can really help your discussions with potential buyers. So in conclusions, in Sweden or in Nordic markets, the market share of natural cosmetics tends to be higher than the European average, which of course offers opportunities for natural ingredients. Another trend that that really has an opportunity for natural ingredients is the Scandinavian beauty trend LAGOM, which favors natural products that are sustainably sourced, but at the same time also there's a strong focus on local ingredients there. What was also interesting is that there is a growing awareness of more what we call more exotic ingredients, so ingredients from outside of Europe. For example, with this brand from South Africa that is building awareness for South African ingredients. And I think the final point, and I think this is important as well, is to be aware that the Swedish market, yes, tends to be larger for natural cosmetics, but Swedish brands still might favor buying through traders in other countries in Europe, especially if these brands are quite small and they don't have or need the volumes to source directly from exporters. So you may need to target them through other countries. I think that's it from my side. If you want to contact OGS, I have an email address here. Also the website where the study will be published next week for more information. If you have any specific questions for me, I also put my email address here as well. So you're welcome to contact us after his presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jolanda. This was really good information, good presentation. I don't think we have actually any questions. Everybody are writing that they would like us to send the presentation afterwards. We would like to highlight, obviously, what Jolanda has mentioned already, that we will publish the market report on our webpage next week about this, the market trends and opportunities for natural ingredients. But we will also send the presentation afterwards and the recording of this. But I know that you have interviewed some importers, some buyers, and one of the conclusions is that they are buying through European traders. But did anyone also mention that, I mean, to buy directly from third countries or from developed countries, did someone mention some type of a recommendation or hint to think about that you could share with us?
Yeah, from both sides. So some tips indeed on why companies don't buy directly and also why they do buy directly.
Okay.
I talked to this company who are mentioning that they are now sourcing ingredients from Ghana, from several countries in South America, because they do value the control that they then have over the value chain. So both in terms of the freshness and the quality of the products that they then source, but I think also in cosmetic products and cosmetic ingredients, it's really important to highlight sort of the marketing stories behind it. So if you have a more direct link to the source, this is very valuable for the market itself. And if you have sufficient volumes of doing that yourself, companies do tend to do that. But of course, it does come with some risks. So especially for smaller brands, because cosmetic products can include 20 ingredients easy. And then if smaller brands need to source all these different ingredients from exporters directly, that really increases their risk, because then they have to source and keep stock of all these different things. Whereas if they work with importers, they take on that burden for them.
Okay.
So for exporters, my advice would really be to have a good overview, a good understanding of what you're offering, but also what kind of companies that you're looking for. So that in this first process of getting to know companies, you can ask the right questions and to determine what volume requirements they have, or how often they source, or how you can also help them to ensure the quality of your product.
Thank you so much for answering and sharing with us that, Jolanda. I also have one question here from the chat box. Thank you for the insights. What are the main natural ingredients imported into Sweden for cosmetics?
That's a really great question. I can give examples because I think probably this is similar to the market itself. But the main natural ingredients, because natural ingredients for cosmetics, it's such a broad group of products, and it's a very intransparent market in that sense. So if you look at really big products like shea butter or different vegetable oils, we can trace it back more easily, so we can find more easily what imports are like. But for smaller products like essential oils or niche vegetable oils, it's really difficult to find the main products. I think for Sweden, in terms of cosmetics, the main natural ingredients will probably be quite similar to the rest of Europe. So for vegetable oils, things like shea butter are really big. I expect palm oil probably also still will be quite big, as well as other vegetable oils. And for essential oils, I would love to know what the main ones are on the Swedish market, but they're just so diverse that it will be difficult to find out. I think the best way to really trace it back is to go to products that are on the market and see similarities. So for example, the products that I've seen, there's a lot of beeswax, olive oil, lavender oil as an essential oil. Yeah, these kinds of ingredients as well.
Thank you, Jolanda. I hope that answered a little bit your question, Chaturi. Otherwise, please let us know.
Yeah.
But I think we're actually on time ending this webinar. So I don't know if you would like to say something more, last thing to say, or we just end this and just give a big thanks to everyone that has joined us today. Please, if you have any doubts, any more questions, just write to us. We will send you the presentation after this. So if there's any more questions, thank you very much. And let's keep in touch, and please join our next webinars also. We will keep you updated, everybody. Thank you so much.